I was a cabin boy the day the captain forgot to lock his desk. The ship rolled like a slow-breathing animal. Lantern light rocked in thin ribs across the bulkheads. The smell of salt and pitch made a glue out of the air. I had been sent to replace a quill, but the drawer slid open farther than it should have. And there it waited folded twice, stiff with oil and ate, hot to the touch, as if it remembered a fire, a map that had been cut in half. The torn edge wasn't clean. Fibers clung like nerves. A cross sat near the bottom left on a blot of land sketched with economical, almost embarrassed strokes. A crescent bay, an iron color of mountains, a coil of mangroves. There was no name. Where other charts wrote proud syllables along their spines, serpentine shoals. Widow's teeth, Saint Peril, this one left silence. The captain's hand had underlined the cross 3 times, digging through the paper. And in the margin, he had not written a heading, only a date. And under that a single number. I closed the drawer like a thief who had decided not to steal, and still felt guilty. The quill found its place in the cup. The lantern sighed. The ship breathed. Above, the deck shouted its usual life ropes slacking, boots arguing with planks, the bosun's whistle cutting the day into manageable pieces. I returned to my chores with the sensation that something important in me had been torn in half to match the map. We were pirates by reputation, not by uniform. No 2 jackets agreed on color. The hats were a democracy of poor decisions. Even the tattoos contradicted one another, but our wake was a signature anyone could read. Suit and reckless, a quill scratch through tidy shipping routes. The captain spoke little and punished less than rumors claimed. He read charts the way priests read weather, and he navigated by the shape of absence. Currents that should be there and were not, stars that forgot to appear. He wore no ring except the scar that circled his left thumb, the kind sailors get from a rope that once loved them too hard. I kept the secret of the half map the way small flames keep their color bright. Quiet, hard to ignore. It followed me into sleep. It sat behind my eyes while I scrubbed the mess, while I stitched canvas, while I chased rats with a bucket, while I balanced bowls when the sea forgot politeness. The torn edge nagged. The cross pulsed. The lack of a name felt personal, an insult to the thing itself, like meeting someone whose face you knew and finding your tongue refusing to. Remember, the ship taught me its anatomy, passage by passage. The forward hold hummed like a sleeping cat. The galley joked, even when people didn't. In the rope locker, the smell of hemp planted a forest in my head. Topsides were a grammar of orders. Below, a grammar of endurance. When the wind turned traitor, we rowed with oars so long they seemed designed to measure a different world. When the wind agreed, the sails bellied like lungs finding a language. We traded in sugar, rumor, and speed. Sometimes the captain took prizes. Sometimes he let fat merchants pass just to teach them the difference between fear and danger. I learned knots and the patience to untie them. I learned that salt takes a bite out of everything it loves. I learned to sleep in a narrow place with my knees in a treaty with the bulkhead. But underneath the skills, a slow fever worked, a hunger for the land with no name. Marked with a cross and silence, the chance to feed the fever came on a morning that made a good first impression. The sea wore a sober blue. The horizon performed the duty of being a straight line. Even the gulls chose civility. We had anchored at a gathering of ships that pretended to be law and called itself a market. Crews traded rope, powder, hard bread, harder pears, and information that could only be weighed with the hand that passed it. The captain permitted me to run errands shoreward, with a list and a purse heavy enough to distract my conscience, in a tent stitched from old sails. A cartographer sat like a spider, amid frames and paper. He sold the world in rectangles and wore ink on his fingers, like weather. I brought him the captain's list to harbor plans, a new compass rose, a tide table, and watched his eyes flicker to the mark on my wrist, where pitch had decorated me 3 days prior. Hold still, he told me without words. He used a rag, like magicians use misdirection. Beneath the stain of pitch he found a faint patch of red, a smear from the captain's desk where the map had bled. His eyes lit the way lanterns do when wind remembers them. He didn't smile. He didn't ask. He gestured toward a set of drawers and laid out 4 charts and a fan, each with a different idea of the same coastline. I pretended to admire them as if I knew one river from another. The names bloomed and blurred. The letters wore arrogance or mercy. The compass roses argued politely in their corners. But nowhere did I see the Crescent Bay exactly as I had seen it. The Iron Mountains leaning, the mangrove coil. I left with what I had been sent to buy, and with a rumor he let fall like a coin between floorboards. A ship with half a map had been seen recently east of the dissonant shoals. Its captain had a laugh like a cough, and a habit of polishing a copper coin with a hole in it. Back aboard, I hid the rumor where treasure breathes under my ribs. It didn't stay hidden long. Word swam up through the crew, as rumors do, becoming more decorative with the telling. Our captain issued no speeches. He folded our new charts into the old, looked at the sky as if it had just said something rude, and pulled up the anchor. The market slid away, small as repentance. Open water took us with both hands. The ship leaned into her profession. On the second evening the sea remembered it was never steady for long. We got our first practice storm early, a rehearsal rather than a performance. Sails thudded and protested. Rain wrote long, swift letters across our cheeks. The mast groaned and then adjusted its expectations. I learned how to love a rope, how to trust friction, how to use my weight as a promise rather than a complaint. Our wake pointed east. The sky pretended to be a steady companion, and then betrayed that pretense by changing personalities every hour. The crew did what crews do, argued about dice, sang insults to the moon, cleaned weapons with devotional care. I kept my hands busy and watched the captain watch the horizon, which is the pirate way of praying. The first true trouble arrived from behind like an apology delivered late. Sails on the lip of the sea, a triangle of black that cut through sunshine as if the color itself were a weapon. Their hull rode low with cannon, our hull rode high with speed. The boatswain laced the day with his whistle. Drums lived in the planks under our feet. The captain never raised his voice. He allowed the wind to join the crew. We ran first, because running is not the same as fear. Running collects choices. The other ship matched our line. We tacked hard enough to make memories stagger. I was sent down to carry powder and carry it carefully. The smell became a mask. The sound above became a rumor. When the first shot arrived, the sea flinched. When our reply answered, the carpenters' hammers took notes. The fight started like a conversation between bad neighbors and ended like bad weather. Smoke invented temporary countenance between us. I carried loads, counted seconds by the ache in my ribs, and returned to the deck in time to watch our captain use the ship the way a fencer uses a cloak. We cut close. Grapples considered their own courage. Then we slipped, and the other captain swore in a flag I didn't recognize. We used our speed not to run, but to make their guns aim at a place we had recently decided not to be, the sea. Accepted a number of gifts it hadn't asked for, shouted promises, the scent of burnt rope. In the end, the other captain chose to keep his anger and his hull, and we kept our course. The crew liked the result. They liked even better the cask of peaches we liberated from a third party who had misread the weather. For one blessed night the mess smelled like summer on a land I had never visited. Then came the doldrums, as if the sea had laughed too hard and needed to catch its breath. The ocean lay down on its back and let the sun write its name across every mirror. Sails hung like thoughts that had lost patience. The crew turned quiet and careful as the water retreated from us, in a moral sense, withholding the gift of moving. We rowed. The oars sliced heat. Sweat tasted like metal. I learned the weight of silence when it is not peace. I learned to count shadows of clouds and pretend they were progress. Hunger came as arithmetic, half rations, quarter, pretend. Heat came as a god easily worshipped and quick to anger. Men argued with themselves and lost. The captain wore his patience like a coat, with every button closed. We rotated through work with the economy of a machine. Even the rats went thin, and the ship creaked like a sleeper turning over on a hard bed. The wind returned one night the way a wrecked friend returns, ashamed of its absence and overgenerous in apology. It brought a storm big enough to deserve a name and refused to share it. The sky split into a philosophy lecture and we failed the class. Lightning practiced calligraphy across the mast. Rain found its way into every thought. The deck pitched like a sentence that had forgotten its verb. I was small in it, and necessary. Rope bit my palms where skin had called itself tough, and learned it had lied. In the middle of the largest wave, when the ship climbed a watery hill not meant for ships, I saw something I will never be able to prove, a row of lights far off, like a city drawing breath, then gone, not extinguished, but redecided. The captain saw it too. I know because his shoulders changed. He did not point. He stared into the place where light had argued with water, and then he smiled in a way that forgave nothing and everyone. After that, he drove us not by the wind, but by the memory of what we had seen, when morning found us. The storm had burned away everything extra. Ropes were honest again. Sails had learned humility. The crew walked as if aware of their bones. I went about the business of surviving, and held the image of those lights, like a coal in my cheek. The half-map, the torn edge, the cross with no name, these were all versions of the same hunger. The sea had promised nothing. Still, I felt as if a hand had turned the world slightly to show us a better angle. We made port in a harbor that wore fog like jewelry. Repairs were performed with the solemnity of surgeries. The carpenter measured planks the way doctors measure pulses. I scrubbed and stitched and fetched and balanced as if that were all there was. Yet every errand tasted like the edge of something larger. The captain kept to himself. The bosun kept to anyone who needed yelling at. In the tavern that pretended to be respectable and failed charmingly, I overheard a murmur of a coin with a hole in it and a laugh that coughed. We found them 3 days out. The ship with our roomer aboard. She bore scars that forgot to be shy. Her sails had been patched with a language I didn't know. The captain on her quarterdeck polished his hold coin and showed his teeth to the wind as if he intended to bite it. We danced at cannon range like cats who disagree about ownership of a sunny patch. Their gunners were better than ours. Our helmsman was better than theirs. A chase line drew itself across the afternoon. Then our captain did something the sea later asked me to explain, and I couldn't. He cut inside a reef no one had drawn on any map. He reduced canvas and turned us into a smaller target while speed increased obscenely. Rock kissed our keel. Foam wrote an argument and lost it. The other captain hesitated a breath too long, because doubt is heavier than lead shot. By the time he committed to the same path, we had changed ours. He scraped. We threaded. Distance multiplied on our side of the ledger. We did not escape to run. We escaped circle. After sunset we came back to them quiet as a lie. We drifted near enough to hear their arguments with their supper. Hooks flew. Quiet wasn't an option anymore. Pirates climbed across the night into each other's plans, and those plans amended themselves in bruises and breath. I was small, and the fight was large. I did what small things do, found the small work that mattered. I cut lines where lines needed cutting. I passed powder to hands that trusted me more than they trusted luck. In the confusion, the captain moved like a man stepping through a memory. He found their captain, the coin spinner, with the cough of a laugh, at the foot of the main mast, and the two of them measured the distance between reason and reputation. I didn't watch closely. I didn't need to. I was busy with a lantern that had ideas about betraying us. When it was over, the hold coin lay near my boot. I kicked it reflexively toward no one, and it found the captain's heel. We left before dawn with less blood than fear would have. predicted, and with something folded into oilcloth and sealed, not spoken of. On our deck, the crew handled the surprise of not dying by laughing too loud and eating too much. I slept like a net pulled empty and left to dry. Morning delivered a change in the air, as real as a change in language. The captain gathered us not with speeches, but with a distance in his gaze that asked everyone to walk a little quieter. He unfolded the oilcloth on the mess table. The object inside made the room hold its breath. It was a map cousin to mine, the other half, torn where mine was torn, the fibers matching like teeth. We didn't cheer. Cheering would have been wrong. A crew that has outlived a storm and a night boarding learns not to waste reverence. The captain fitted the halves together, laid a thin strip of canvas across the wound, and stitched the paper like a surgeon who knows his patient will never be young again, but can still be useful. The cross now sat centered on a landmass that admitted to itself. Rivers had names. Mountains had the dignity of lines. On the bottom margin, in a hand too tidy to be pirate, letters had once declared a name and then thought better of it. The name had been scraped away. Shadows of ink remained, the ghost of a thought. We steered for the place where the crossed lines met the world. The ocean complied, and then reconsidered, and then complied again. We met a pod of whales that sounded like organs in a church I had never joined. We watched birds that disagreed about wind and still returned home. We ate better than we deserved, because the crew invented reasons to share. Storms returned in an orderly procession. The ship learned the sequence of their gestures. We patched and replaced, and promised, and performed. We fought when fighting was cheaper than running. We ran when running made wealth of tomorrow. I watched the captain get older the way rope does, stronger but more honest about where it will break. I got older too, in the way of people whose hands have permanent conversations with wood. When land lifted from the horizon, the emotion was not triumph, but relief. Triumphant men shout. Relieved men exhale. A ridge like a sleeping animal lay along the edge of the sea. A crescent bay opened the mouth of the island to us. On our map, the word that had been erased hovered like a rumor. On the world itself, no word appeared. Sand named itself by being sand. Trees presented their green without requesting letters to hold it up. We entered the bay at dawn, because dawn teaches ships how to behave. The water inside wore the color of knives. On the tide line lay the bones of decisions. Ribs of old wrecks, planks tattooed by barnacles, pulleys that had accepted rust as destiny. The crew walked backward into quiet. Our anchor paid out and kissed the bottom with a courtesy we hadn't heard in months. We rode ashore with the gravity of people stepping onto a story they had told themselves too often. The beach accepted feet without ceremony. Crabs consulted us briefly and filed reports. The air smelled of resin and something else that might have been the memory of fire. In the line of mangroves, a path already existed, which felt like either welcome or warning. We chose to call it welcome, because human beings are built to do that until proven wrong. We found the first chest before noon, because someone had arranged for us to find it. It lay in the shade of a tree, whose roots reinterpreted the contract between earth and air. Its iron straps had become ideas, rather than choices. The lock side open under the insistence of a crowbar. Inside, nothing. Not even sand. Empty the way a held breath is empty. Another chest weighted down the path, and another in caves, where water had rehearsed sculpture, in the rib cages of wrecks, under a slab of coral that had once been somebody's ceiling, beneath a cairn of very deliberate stones. Each was empty. Each arrived with the weight of a gift that refused to be carried. The crew reacted as crews do. Some laughed in that edge of crying way that makes a fist in your throat. Some swore without invention. Some blamed the island for not participating in our story. Some blamed the captain because that is the cost of command. The captain handled anger the way he handled wind, by measuring it, never by pretending it wasn't there. He walked deeper into the island, out of sight, as if the trees had called his name. He returned with a branch, and the look of a man who had solved a riddle that did not matter anymore. We camped. Fire improved our courage. Food improved our manners. The sky became an argument between blue and black, in which both sides won. I walked to the edge of the tide alone, and knelt beside the water that had brought us here, and licked the sand with the honesty of an animal. I thought about half a map and a torn drawer and lantern light. I thought about peaches, about gunsmoke making temporary countenance, about oars turning heat into progress. I thought about the row of lights that had appeared in the middle of a storm, like a city that had decided not to exist. I understood something simple, which always feels like a betrayal of all the complex things you told yourself to justify the work. The treasure had never been the point. The island didn't know our names, and that was a kind of mercy. Every empty chest was a confession. We had come for weight and found space. The map had trained us to risk, to endure, to repair, to listen. The island rewarded those lessons by refusing to distract us with gold. I laughed quietly, because silence knows how to share a joke if you let it. The captain walked to me without noise. Not because he wanted to be dramatic, but because the sand agreed with his feet. He stood beside me and did the thing he did best. Watched. Not the water. Not the horizon. Me. I didn't look at him. Looking at the sea was easier. I felt the question in him without hearing it. I answered it by taking the half map that had once been mine and the half that had not, and folding them together in a way that made them one. Then two. Then one again, like breathing. The seam had healed as much as paper does. We returned to the camp where the crew had talked the island into being a punchline and then a promise. Sleep took them as it takes sailors suddenly, without decorum, with boots still on. The fire narrowed from a conversation to a philosophy. The captain set the map across his knee. He held a piece of charcoal in fingers scarred by rope. He waited. I took the charcoal from him and wrote a name where the old one had been scraped away. The letters were not fancy, because I am not a fancy person. They were simple, because the truth had become simple. The island with no name. I expected the act to feel like theft. It felt like a door opening where no wall had ever stood. The name was not a claim. It was a description of a decision. We would leave it unnamed as a monument to all the places that refuse to be reduced to nouns and still deserve visits. We would carry the name with us as a tool for telling stories that did not lie about what matters. Morning arrived with birds that argued in a dialect I admired. We explored the interior not as prospectors but as guests. We found a spring that spoke the language of patience. We found trees whose fruit insisted on sharing. We found a hill from which the bay looked like a mouth telling a secret. We repaired a small shrine someone else had built to a god the map did not mention. We left offerings the god would respect. Rope, clean water, a sharpened knife, a loaf too large for one person. We didn't touch the wrecks except to keep them from killing us. We learned a path and then refused to own it. When we put out to sea again, the island did not pretend to care. That was another way it gave blessings. Our wake stepped away from the crescent bay and straightened like a spine that had been hunched too long over a wrong question. The crew talked, but their talk had changed color. The jokes were kinder. The boasts had learned to end sooner. The fights, when they came, were shorter and more about ideas than insults. We met a storm and let it measure us. We passed a ship that needed a toe to wind and offered it and accepted payment in the currency of reputation. In a harbor, I found the cartographer from the 10th zone of old sails. He saw the map, newly mended, newly named, and nodded like a man who recognizes a scar. He offered to copy it for money, for rumor, for the pleasure of filling a neat rectangle with knowledge. I told him he could copy the coastline but not the name. The name was a lesson, and lessons dilute when sold. He surprised me by agreeing. As months reorganized themselves into years, the island lived in us. We took other jobs, other risks, other storms. I stopped being a cabin boy and started being a person whose hands answered questions before my lips did. The captain's hair learned salt from more years than the sea could claim credit for. We visited the island twice more, once with supplies, for people who might be braver than we were, once with nothing but time to spare. We kept its name by refusing to write it where maps become profit. I carried a small piece of its sand in a bottle and never showed it off. The bottle was not proof. It was a conversation with my own memory. Sometimes on watch I would place it in front of the lantern and watch light turn it into a little heat. The crew didn't ask and I didn't tell. We all had our versions, our own private unnamed places. I became the kind of man who teaches knots to others and learns new ones when old rules fail. I became the kind of man who oils hinges in the middle of the night because the door shouldn't wake sleepers. I became the kind of man who knows when to run and when to stay and when to sit with someone's fear until it forgets its worst ideas. None of this was treasure. All of it was wealth. When I finally left, the captain's shipmen, like me, always leave and always stay a little lie, took the map, not to hoard it, but to keep its lesson from being thrown on a tavern wall like a trophy. I folded it along new lines. Maps are conversation partners, not gods. In a harbor where the wind wore bells and the roofs wore salt, I rented a small room with a table that forgave ink stains. I wrote the story the map had given me in the language of people who know how to wait for tide. I didn't become a cartographer. I didn't become a captain. I became exactly what I had been that first night in the captain's cabin. Someone who sees a drawer left open and understands that a life is being offered inside. I kept a coil of rope by the door. I kept clean water by the window. I kept my boots mended. I kept a small, stubborn hope that if a boy ever opened my desk, he would find not loot, not destiny, but a question that required endurance rather than luck. Years later, when I walked onto a beach that looked like a cousin to the first, children were building a harbor from driftwood and arguments. One had a piece of paper with a crescent crudely drawn. He had put a cross on a smear of land and had not written a name. I watched him think with his tongue out, the way children do when concentration steals manners. He paused, looked at the water as if asking permission, and then wrote not an answer. Not a claim, just a promise. Island, for now. I wanted to clap. I wanted to bow. I wanted to tell him everything, and told him nothing, which is sometimes the correct number of words. At night, I still wake to the smell of pitch, and peaches, and gun smoke, and rain. I still see the row of lights that appeared in a storm to show us not where to go, but what sort of men we had become by going. I never learned what name had been scraped off the bottom of the map. It doesn't matter. Some erasures are sacred. Our version was better because it refused to pretend that naming is ownership. If this sounds like a sermon, forgive me. It's only a log, written by a hand that prefers rope to quill, and learned to respect both. I have put the map back into a drawer. I have left the drawer unlocked, not by accident, not as a trap, as an invitation to anyone who understands that a cross beside a nameless shore is a door into the kind of story that doesn't end at the first empty chest. Some nights, when the wind from the bay remembers the right direction, I unfold the map and lay it under a bowl of fruit to keep it flat. The paper smells faintly of resin and mistakes. I trace the crescent of the bay, the iron line of the ridge, the coil of the mangroves, and the little cross that taught me how to measure value. I run a finger along the seam where two halves decided to become one, and then remembered they had always been parts of the same thing. The island with no name is still there, not just on the water and the sand in the ridge, but in the way I tie my boots, in the way I write a letter, in the way I leave a door open a moment longer for someone carrying too much. It's in the way I look at a full chest and ask whether it needs me, or whether I need the practice of walking past. If you ever find the place, be kind. Take nothing except what you can carry in your posture. Leave nothing except a repaired hinge, a replenished bucket, a small shrine with a knife and a rope and water and bread, Keep the name by not using it. Keep the lesson by teaching it without maps. Keep the cross as a reminder that some destinations mark us before we mark them. When the crew slept that first night, I wrote those letters on the map with a charcoal stub. The island with no name. The firelight tried to turn the words into shadows. Dawn turned them into instructions. We left with empty hands, and did not mind. We left with a ship that knew what it could do, and a captain who knew what he would not do, and a boy who had learned enough to start being something else. I still am. When we left the bay behind us, the sea folded the horizon over our stern, as if to hide what we had discovered. The island became smaller, then faint, then a suggestion of green and stone on the water's eyelid, and finally nothing but memory. Yet in the way the ship leaned into the wind, in the way the crew walked with less noise in their boots, in the way the captain tied his coat just once instead of 3 times, the island stayed with us. We carried it like an extra mast. Days resumed their normal sequence, mornings gulls, afternoons arguments with ropes, evenings fire of the sun, turning the sails into stained glass. But normality wore a new face. The chests we had opened, empty of gold, yet heavy with lesson, had rearranged the crew's hearts. Even those who had sworn and spat now kept a certain distance from greed, as if they had tasted its emptiness too vividly to hunger again so soon. I found myself different too. The boy who once lingered by the captain's desk, desperate for secrets, had been replaced by someone who had already seen beyond the locked drawer. My chores no longer felt like tasks owed, but like practices that prepared me for something larger. Rope in my hands became not just rope, but history fibers, carrying stories of storms survived, of sails held, of lives saved. When I patched sails, I thought of the map stitched across its wound, and I understood repair as another kind of treasure. We touched harbors again, though they no longer tasted the same. In one, we sold timber. In another, we bartered spices for gunpowder. In a third, we docked only long enough to drink water from a well that remembered the mountain it had flowed through. Each harbor wanted stories of treasure, of battles, of blood spilled. We gave them half-truths, because whole truths would have spoiled too easily. I watched their eyes lean forward, expecting tales of coins and rubies, and I pitied them quietly. They wanted gold, and we had found something heavier. Storms tested us again, as they always do. A gale with teeth came shrieking from the west, snapping one of our yards like a brittle bone. Men cursed and bled. Sails split like old scars reopening. Yet when the storm spat us out, we laughed not at survival, but at the realization that our laughter itself was proof of wealth. It struck me then. The island had not given us immunity to danger, but it had given us permission to survive it with meaning. Weeks blurred into a rolling canvas of gray and blue. At times I dreamed we had imagined the island, that the chests had never been real, that the crescent bay was only the hunger of exhausted eyes. But then, as if to remind me, I would feel the weight of charcoal in my pocket, the same stub I had used to write the island with no name. I would run my thumb along its blunt edge and recall the firelight trembling over those words, and I knew it had been real, because the world afterward had been rearranged. The captain never spoke of the island directly, but I saw how it worked on him. He grew quieter, his orders shorter, yet his silences carried more weight. In disputes, he favored mercy, where once he would have favored efficiency. He spent longer on the quarterdeck at night, tracing stars with his eyes as if they were entries in a ledger he alone could read. Sometimes he would stand with his hands resting on the rail and whisper something into the dark water. I never asked what. I think it was gratitude. Not every lesson pleased everyone. Some of the crew muttered that we had wasted months chasing emptiness. They looked at their purses, light with coin, and their hands, scarred from rope, and wondered aloud what profit the island had yielded. But even they fell silent when storms passed us by, when food seemed to last longer than rationing allowed, when luck favored us in ways small enough to be dismissed, but numerous enough to be undeniable. The island was with us, whether we spoke its name or not. One evening, while repairing a torn sail alone in the dusk, I caught sight of another ship on the horizon. Her sails were tattered, her hull low in the water. She moved like a wounded animal. When we hailed her, she offered no reply, but drifted close enough for us to read her pain. Boards gaped, ropes dangled, and on her deck men lay sprawled, too weak even to lift a hand. They had chased something and found ruin. We pulled them aboard, gave them bread, gave them water, gave them silence enough for their shame. One of them muttered through cracked lips that they had sought a nameless island rumored to hold endless wealth. I shivered but said nothing. Some truths are better kept as warnings than as boasts. Later that night, as they slept on our deck, I unfolded our mended map in secret. My finger traced the Crescent Bay, the place where we had stood among wrecks and empty chests. I felt both pride and sorrow. Pride that we had lived the story to its marrow. Sorrow that others might chase only its husk. I folded the map and tucked it away again, whispering into the night, "Let it stay unnamed. Let it stay ours." Seasons shifted. Autumn painted the sea in deeper shades. Winds grew sharper, quicker to anger. The captain led us farther south, into waters that smelled of fire and earth, where islands smoked on the horizon and the sea boiled with hidden tempers. Here we traded for fruit so sharp it woke the tongue, and cloth dyed with the blood of insects. Here we fought once, more against men who mistook us for fat prey and left them with fewer teeth than they arrived with. Yet even in battle, I felt the absence of greed. We fought to survive, not to claim. We fought for the ship itself, our floating home, not for riches in someone else's chest. One night, as stars smeared across the heavens in a river of white, I sat on the bow with the map unfolded across my knees. I stared not at the island, but at the torn seam, the place where two halves had once been strangers. I traced that scar with my finger, and it struck me. We were all halves once, stitched together by storms and choices, until we resembled something whole. Perhaps that was the true treasure, not the island, not the map, but the mending itself. The years stretched. I grew taller, my hands more certain, my voice less tremulous, when I gave orders to newer boys who once stood where I had stood. The captain's hair grew whiter, his shoulders heavier, though his eyes never dimmed. The crew shifted, some left in ports we would never see again. Others joined with eyes too bright for their own safety. Yet the story of the island lingered in all of us, woven into our laughter, into the way we measured risk, into the silences we allowed when the sea demanded respect, and always, when men in taverns spoke of hidden treasure, when whispers curled about nameless lands and cursed chests, I felt the coal of memory glow in me. I never contradicted them. I never corrected their fantasies. Instead, I let them dream, because dreams are maps too, leading each man toward the truth he deserves. But inside, I carried a certainty they could never purchase, that some treasures live not in gold, but in the spine straightened by storms, in the hand that offers bread to a stranger, in the map mended across its wound. When, at last, I sat alone one evening with only the stars for company, I unfolded the map for the final time. The charcoal letters had faded, but not vanished. The island with no name. I held it up to the lantern and watched the light glow through its fibers. I thought of the boy I had been, crouched in the captain's cabin, drawer open, heart racing. I thought of storms survived, of battles fought, of empty chests opened with reverent hands, and I understood the story would never end, because the island had never wanted to be an ending. It had wanted to be a beginning. Years at sea blurred the boy I once was into a man the sea had crafted. My hands no longer trembled when knots resisted. My voice no longer wavered when the deck demanded orders. I had learned to read skies as if they were paragraphs, to hear the weight of waves as if they were sermons. The map remained with me, folded into a leather pouch, the words "the island with no name" fading, but not forgotten. Every harbor we touched, every tavern rumor, every story of cursed treasure, seemed only to circle back to it. The captain, older now, trusted me with more than errands. He left me watches of the night, let me chart courses when stars were clouded, even permitted me to discipline younger hands when they mistook arrogance for courage. I grew into authority without noticing until the day I heard my own orders echo across the deck with a weight I had once feared. Yet time takes its toll, even on iron men. The captain's shoulders stooped. His cough deepened. His hand shook when he lifted a compass. One evening, as the sea rested calm and indifferent, he placed the folded map in my hand. "Steer your own seas," his silence seemed to say. Not long after, he chose to remain in a quiet port, a man trading storms for stillness. The crew divided. Some stayed, some drifted into other ships, and some followed me because they believed the map had chosen me. I did not argue. I simply steered. We sailed under a new flag, one stitched from old cloth but carrying none of the old captain's shadows. I named no destination. Yet, as weeks grew into months, I felt the island calling not as treasure, but as pilgrimage. Word had spread of it, twisted by mouths into tales of endless gold and fountains of immortality. Ships vanished, chasing it. Others returned, broken. I feared the island's lesson would drown beneath greed. I resolved to see it once more, not as a thief of riches, but as a keeper of truth. The voyage tested us harder than before. Rival ships hunted us, believing we carried secret knowledge of the island. A fleet cornered us among reefs sharp as razors. We fought not for wealth but for breath, boards splintering, sails tearing like parchment in fire. Cannon smoke turned day to dusk, but luck, no, not luck, endurance pulled us through. The sea claimed our enemies, not us. I knew then, the island was protecting its own story, lending us survival as payment for our loyalty to its silence. When at last we neared the Crescent Bay, years older, hearts heavier, the island rose from the horizon like a ghost stepping out of fog. My crew fell into silence. Even the gulls circled without calling. Wrecks still marked the shore, though older now, more skeletal. The path through mangroves waited, as if it had been expecting us all along. This time, the island revealed more. We found not only empty chests, but carvings and stonewords in a tongue none of us knew, but the meaning hummed beneath our skin. Stories of other seekers, other crews, who had come and understood that the emptiness was deliberate, that the treasure was the journey, the endurance, the becoming. The island itself was a mirror held to our souls. Some of my crew wept, not from disappointment, but from release. At night I stood by the fire with the map in my hands. The charcoal letters had blurred, yet I traced them again, darker this time, with ink I had carried for years without purpose. The name glowed in firelight. The island with no name. I realized then that the name was never about the land, but about Usalas without titles. Men remade by storms, people who chose meaning over gold. We left offerings at the shrine, rope, water, bread, as before, but I left something more, the map itself. I placed it on the stone altar, waited with a knife, and whispered farewell. Whoever found it next would see not a promise of treasure, but a story that demanded endurance. And if no one ever found it, then the island would keep its secret until the sea swallowed every rumor. When dawn returned, we sailed away lighter than ever before. My hands felt free, my chest unburdened. The crew, too, had changed, voices calmer, laughter deeper, disputes shorter. We had been poor men chasing gold. We left as richer men carrying wisdom. The world would tell its own lies about the island. Let them. We knew the truth, and the truth was enough. The sea has left its signatures across my body, lines on my face carved by wind, scars on my hands etched by rope, a limp in my knee gifted by a deck that once rose too suddenly. I no longer sail. not because I do not wish to, but because time itself has moored me to land. My ship sleeps in the memory of others now, and I sit on a quiet shore, a place where gulls know me, where children run with driftwood swords, and where the tide keeps me company with its slow applause. I spend my days mending nets for fishermen, sharpening knives too dull to argue with bone, and telling stories to those who will listen. Most prefer tales of battle, of cannon smoke blotting the sun, of storm waves higher than houses, of daring escapes through reefs sharp as razors. I tell those when asked, though my voice has grown tired of repeating the noises of violence. But sometimes, when the evening softens and the younger ones gather close, I speak of something different, a place without a name. They lean forward, eyes bright, expecting treasure, coins, jewels, crowns of forgotten kings. I let them expect. Then I tell them of empty chests, of wrecks bleached white by salt, of nights where the firelight flickered over faces that had learned the weight of silence. Some grow restless, disappointed that the tale holds no gold, but a few remain still, listening to the space between my words, and I know they hear it. The true wealth I cannot place in their palms. The map is gone, left long ago on the island's altar of stone, but I remember it better than I remember the lines on my own hands. The scene where halves once met, the faint ghost of a scraped-away word. The charcoal letters I pressed into its margin, the island with no name. I do not need the paper. The map lives in the way I walk, in the way I pause before judging another man, in the way I laugh, even when food is scarce. It has become part of me, and through me, perhaps part of them. Sometimes, in dreams, I return. The crescent bay gleams in dawn light. The mangroves whisper in languages older than sails. The shrine waits, patient and unchanging. I walk along wrecks that have grown even thinner, chests that remain open, refusing to offer distraction. The island does not ask me questions anymore. It simply allows me to stand and breathe, and that is enough. I wake with salt on my lips, though the sea is far from my bed. I have watched generations rise and fall. Young sailors leave with eyes full of hunger, return with eyes full of storms, or never return at all. I see myself in them and sometimes wonder whether they will stumble upon the island, whether they will understand its silence, or whether they will curse it as an empty trick. The island is not for everyone. It chooses who may hear its lesson, and even then, some hearts are too loud with greed to notice. My end will not be at sea. That is a truth I once resisted but have since accepted. I will die on land, where the earth holds me steady, where the waves sing lullabies from a distance. But when the last tide comes for me, I will let it carry me back, not in body, but in memory. I will step once more onto that sand, hear the gulls circle without calling, see the firelight dance on the name I wrote. I will walk the path through mangroves and leave my final offering. Not rope, not bread, not water, but gratitude. If any child asks me what treasure lies on the island with no name, I will answer this: the treasure is yourself. Return to you after storms and hunger, after fear and fury. You arrive seeking gold, but you depart with a spine straighter than iron and a heart quieter than the sea at dawn. They may not understand now, but perhaps one day, when their own sails crack in a storm, when their own hands bleed on rope, when they kneel before an empty chest, they will remember, and they will smile, as I smile now, and know the truth. I was a cabin boy once, chasing secrets in a captain's desk. I am an old man now, telling stories by the fire. Between those two lives lies the map, the voyage, the storm, the crescent bay, the shrine, the silence, and the name. I leave it to you, whoever you are, to carry forward not as a rumor, not as a promise, but as an invitation. The island with no name waits, always has, always will.